Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting the channel via PayPal or Patreon. You'll find the links in the video description. I'm continuing my look at some games from the 19th century and the match between Paul Morphy, the American chess genius, and Adolf Anderssen, who was quite a chess genius himself. Anderssen was probably the strongest player in Europe in the mid-19th century. And, well, as some of you have pointed out, in fact, although Morphy won this match convincingly, in fact his understanding in some positions wasn't so far in advance of Anderssen, and maybe Anderssen understood some positions better than Morphy. And I think this game illustrates that very well. By the way, these ideas are discussed very nicely in this book. Can you see that? Yeah, On the Origin of Good Moves by Dutchman Willy Hendricks. Very well researched book, very thought-provoking. I've been flicking through it in the last couple of days. Excellent book. So let's move on and have a look at this game. So this was game 6 of the match between Adolf Anderssen and Paul Morphy. Anderssen with white in this game. Now, he'd played e4 in his first two games with the white pieces. In this game, he started with a3, and apparently it was said that basically he felt that Morphy had been his match in those e4 games, so he played this move, which apparently he dabbled with occasionally anyway. e5, so basically now Anderssen is playing, it's like colours reversed, and he plays c4, and it's a Sicilian defence with colours reversed and the inclusion of the move a3, which, well, is quite a useful move in the Sicilian actually. And very much true to his style, Morphy plays in a very straightforward way, just opening up the centre. So now we have an open Sicilian position, and Anderssen plays e3, so this is a Taimanov with colours reversed. Knight f3, and now that the knight attacks the pawn. Very important tactic is that in this position e4 is not a very good move because queen a4 check wins a pawn. Simple double attack. Very important tactic in Sicilian positions actually. So after knight f3, the pawn was protected with bishop d6, bishop e2, Morphy castled, so you can see no waste at all. Straightforward development, castle as quickly as possible. And here Anderssen played d4. So striking out in the middle, and well, it's a very sensible move, and I would say, well, it's roughly level. But here Morphy made, well, I would say a typical decision for him. He went to try to seize the initiative straight away. He should probably just exchange on d4. Now one could take back straight away with the pawn, or knight takes. But in this position, black would exchange and just remove the bishop. And, well, black can claim that there's been some slight structural damage here. But I mean, you can't speak of any advantage here. I'd say it's roughly level. But instead of that, Morphy exchanged and played e4. So absolutely typical of his style. He wants to seize the initiative straight away, pushing the knight back and playing f5. So claiming space on the king side. You can see that bishop is in a beautiful position. But the position isn't so clear because in exchanging on c3, that has given white a beautiful centre. That majority of pawns in the centre of the board. So how clear is this? Not sure. Probably white should just play c4 here actually. But Anderssen played f4, which is understandable because he wants to block out this bishop. Now perhaps you'd like to have a think here. How would you play if you had black to play? Because here, I don't think Morphy gets it right. And I think, you know, this is a good illustration that in some positions, you know, Morphy, you know, his understanding wasn't so great. Okay, what would you play as black? Would you go for g5 as Morphy did? Well, that's a very risky move, as we'll see, because in fact it probably inflicts more damage on black than it does on white. The king is now very exposed. In game 8, Morphy, to his credit, improved with queen h4 check. And the queen came back, but you know, this queen is sort of hanging around the king's side, could be dangerous. Maybe g5 later, but also connects with the middle of the board as well. That's a better continuation. But maybe the best move is just to take here. And now one could play c6 and queen c7 to attack down this diagonal, but even better, just offer a pawn. And you know, black has potential to attack because, you know, the white's king side looks a little bit airy, and black has very nice development. I think that's certainly the best way to play. But instead, so Morphy played g5, and as we'll see, this is quite a risky move. Bishop c4. So this allows the knight to enter the game, and also now you can see that that pawn is protected by the pawn and the bishop. Morphy exchanged and played queen e8, so he's shifting his queen over potentially to the king side. Or maybe another direction, queen c6. Now here, knight e5 is a pretty good move. If that's taken, then it'll open up this diagonal for the bishop. The queen also has potential to attack down here. Looks quite nice. And if queen takes c3, this is lovely. Rook b1 with the idea of rook b3 and rook g3 check. And you can see the king is really lacking defenders. And don't forget that queen can fly out to h5. It's a beautiful position. So knight e5 does look like the best move. But Anderssen played queen b3, which is also certainly not bad. Threatening a big discovered check. Queen d5. Rook b1 protects the queen. Looks down here. b6. Yeah, b6 actually isn't really necessary. I think it's better to bring a piece out quickly. But b6. Again, knight e5 is quite a good move. But very interesting idea that Anderssen had. Clearly, he wants to attack the king. He's seen that the king lacks defenders. And he played queen a2. And then queen e2. So this is all about just sliding out of this pin. And now this knight is free to come back. So instead of hopping into e5, this is what he had in mind. To use that knight as a blockader. And looking at the f5 pawn. Obviously attacking the queen as well. And actually this turns out beautifully. One could even go on the attack straight away with g4. But c4 feels really nice as well. So claiming the middle of the board. And here rook b3. So his intention is obviously at some moment to try to switch to the other side of the board with the rook. Have a think. How would you play here with black? I think it's a very interesting moment in the game because although white's centre looks very impressive, black is still alright here. You know, Anderssen, I think, could have had a very good position with that earlier move, knight e5, rather than knight e5, rather than knight e3. Morphy is still okay here, but he didn't get it right. So what would you do with black in this position? Well, the king is still a problem. And Morphy decided to play king f7 to clear the g-file. But that is a really risky move, stepping into the centre. Although at the moment it looks as though black has sufficient cover for the king, it's actually very drafty, particularly with white in control of the centre. What he should have done Let's play h6. And then king h7. Now, if that rook comes up to f7, the queen's rook comes over to g8. You can see that queen, the king rather, is better protected than in the game on f7. The rooks come over and they help potentially with the counter-attack, but also to protect the king as well. And black is okay there. But after king f7, well, Morphy misjudged this pretty badly. Bishop b2. King h1. So that's just tucking the king out of the way. And now he breaks through. d5. It's also removing the king from g1 means that he's not going to get in trouble on this diagonal. Pawn takes. Now, if knight d5, then queen h5 check is a very clear illustration of how quickly actually black's king can suffer in the middle of the board. So the queen checks the king, looks at these pawns. I mean, black is already lost there. So the queen has to step back. Now look what's happened with that pawn advance. It's carved open this diagonal. This pawn is looking vulnerable. In fact, he moves knight c4, which is it's a great move. Looking at these key squares, but also ready to switch the rook over to h3. So Anderssen's grand strategy seems to be coming good here. And this is a very difficult position for black to defend. For example, rook g6 looks, potentially guards this one, perhaps covers the king. But then knight e5. And here, well, g4. And queen takes e4. Still looks great for white. This is vulnerable. Potential to attack that knight. White has a clear advantage there. After knight c4, Morphy, well, he's improvising. He's running with the king, but, well, this is really bad for black. Probably the simplest move is just rook h3, keeping all white's options here, potentially taking here, but potentially knight e5 as well. It's a tremendous position for white. Instead, Anderssen took on f6 straight away. It's also good, and again, rook h3 should be the move. And for example, here one can play very positionally actually. So now the knight does come back to attack this pawn, and rook h5. And there's no good defense here actually. There are threats here, but also potentially the queen can switch to this diagonal. Should actually be winning for white. But Anderssen plays queen b2. It doesn't look bad, but he just gets the order slightly wrong. Queen d4. I mean, it looks so impressive for white. Materially still even here, but white is dominating that center. I mean, this is still very tough to defend. King g8, the king goes back. Rook h6 looks so nasty for black, but Morphy is tough. d6. I mean, if I were to bet on this game, I would go for white every time. It just looks wonderful. Pawn advances. King is not secure. I mean, certainly compared with white's king. Rook f7. Attacking the rook, which retreats, but you never know. Rook g3 check. Queen a4. Okay, so Morphy is fighting back. So there is a pin here. Rook c1. I mean, it looks absolutely terrifying, but apparently black is still okay here. Rook c5. But it's really on the edge. I mean, I won't go into sort of details of defense, but yeah, along the lines there was a way. I mean, it's very computery, but in practice, very, very difficult for black. And here, as Morozzi, the great Hungarian player, pointed out later, White has a very strong move here. If you can find this move, congratulations. I'll have a little slurp of tea. You try and find this move for white. White to play. How do you play here? This is not easy. Well, here, Anderssen made an exchange sacrifice, which certainly looks really dangerous. Instead, Queen d2 is the move. The point is this: you escape from the pin. You also protect the rook. So it means this, well, for two reasons. The knight is now free to move, either perhaps e5, probably e5, but potentially even e3. And if rook takes knight, here's the little tactic. d7 forces the win of the rook. And it is really hard for black now. So after queen d7, knight e5, that exchanges off that important defensive piece. And actually, this should be winning. Should be winning for white. With this queen potentially coming in here, or maybe even on the long diagonal as well. Yeah. So, queen d2, tricky move. But instead, Anderssen took on g7, which certainly looks really tempting. I mean, with black's forces, you know, on opposite sides of the board, rook c3. Now that potentially looks to swing over here. And, well, again, if you can find a defense for black here, congratulations. There is only one good move. And Morphy found it. So, I mean, I think we've seen some excellent play from Anderssen. He's, you know, achieved certainly earlier a winning position. And I'm sure he probably thought this one was in the bag as well. But Morphy found a brilliant defensive move. It's the only move to defend. e3. Very clever. So it's not possible to play knight takes because queen can be taken. If queen takes, then rook takes. And, well, white has a draw in this position. Like this. In fact, we've seen this drawing mechanism before in another game, Morphy Löwenthal. I mean, there are various ways that white can do this, but white only has a draw. So, for example, queen f6 is also a draw here, and obviously that's a draw instantly. But instead, Anderssen overreached. He played rook takes, and after rook takes, well, you'll notice that e8 is covered. I mean, who knows what Anderssen overlooked here, but now white is a whole rook down, and I'm afraid the whole white's position just came crashing down. And that's here. Anderssen resigned. It's obviously going to be mate very soon. Yeah, such an interesting game, actually. You know, looked at with modern eyes, seeing a Sicilian, a reverse Sicilian played, basically. And here, Morphy didn't get it right. After f4, yeah, g5. Things really came home to roost after g5. Black's king, as Morphy found, was in big trouble. He missed a good chance here. And, you know, Anderssen played, I think, a really nice strategic game, but couldn't quite clinch it at the end. And a bit of Morphy genius, this fantastic defence, which obviously discombobulated Anderssen, and he ended up losing when he could have had a draw here. Yeah, really interesting game, actually. And on all the reverse Sicilians that they played in this match, there were 3 of them, were very tight games indeed. That's where Anderssen performed the best. I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks very much for watching. Oh, I should remember, today, yes, I almost forgot. Today, Tuesday the 17th of May, it's discount day. It's discount day at ChessBase. My PowerPlay DVDs and downloads are all on sale. 25% off for 24 hours. 25% off the PowerPlay DVD series. My goodness, very important. So do check out the links. I'll put the links in the video description, but also in the comments as well. I'll put them at the top of the pile. So do check out my PowerPlay DVDs if you're interested in openings, maybe the King's Gambit, maybe the Sicilian Najdorf, the French Defence, middle game, end games. Do check them out. You can also get the whole lot for a huge discount. So do check that out. Thanks for watching.